Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.
Welcome, Steve. So we have Stephen in the studio today. Steve, we've known each other probably a couple of years now. Well, I don't know, it's a couple of years, maybe a year.
It's about a year, I think. Yeah.
But business coach.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Business coach is the proper sort of category or term for what you do. And I know what you do is very good because I've heard good things about you. But before we delve too much into that, as usual, I like to sort of start right from the beginning. And especially, it's always one of my, reservations about business coaching is very often, and we've seen it time and time again in networking circles, we hear these business coachings and you think, what makes you qualified to tell me what to do? And it's often a question asked by I'm sure many business owners, and I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm not saying you need to have run a massive business or anything like that, but sometimes it's hard to hear advice or criticism even from someone if they haven't been down in the trenches themselves. But I'm sure you're going to enlighten me and tell me why it's okay for you to tell me. But go for it. Let's start from the beginning if I can. Where did you grow up? Are you a Norfolk lad?
No, I'm not a Norfolk. Norfolk lad.
Can't seem to pick them, can I?
I was born and spent my early formative years in just borders of London, Essex, Ilford, basically. Kind of Redbridge area. Went to school around there. Was a product of the Thatcher assisted place scheme. So through my 11 plus, got a place at a public school back then. And I was pretty academic kid, sort of, always learned to read quite early and, and good at passing exams, and was very much an academic, in a bit of a SWAT really, I guess. And that kind of, I was pretty applied academically till I got to about 16, and then got into A levels and kind of lost my way a little bit.
Good. Everyone should lose their way at that time.
I managed to scrape 3 A levels, but I didn't do as well as I should have done, really. But I wouldn't say I got into a bad crowd. I just kind of lost my way a bit, really. But I managed to get into university. It was always the expectation was always set that I would go to university. My school, the majority of us went to university, and it would have been quite unusual for me to have chosen not to. Mm-hmm. I did think about it for a while, and my parents were pretty clear, no, you're going to university. So I got into Surrey University. I did metallurgy, which is the study of metals and extraction and
not even heard that.
Fabrication.
Not even heard that term before. But.
No, metallurgy. It doesn't. I mean, there are still a few metallurgy courses around. My course doesn't exist anymore. It's now been sucked into what's now mechanical engineering. So so I did that, and it's an applied science. So kind of quite heavy analytical. It was quite mathematical, although I didn't do maths A level, which was a bit of a problem. So it taught me the art of being analytical. So I did that, and I did really well, actually. Initially, first year, I was playing around a bit, and I scraped through the first year. I was told if I failed anything.
So what would someone studying that usually end up?
So they'd usually end up in aerospace, steel fabrication. I did an exchange. It was a sandwich course where we did the third year out in industry.
Yeah.
And I spent 6 months working in a steel fabrication place. And then actually in South Africa, interestingly, during apartheid, which was really interesting to witness that firsthand. I spent 6 months there, and I spent 6 months working for IBM down in. They had a big setup down on the south coast near Portsmouth, and I was working in their lab. They outsourced a lot of their components, and we would be in the lab that would test the specs for things like. So this was when the IBM PC was launched. Mm-hmm. I was actually there when they launched the PC. Wow. This was the first desktop PC. Yeah. So we would test the sort of specs of the kit that came in, and then I went back to my first year. I messed around and I scraped through. And then I seemed to kind of click with the whole course in the second year. And I did really well in my second year, really well. Really kind of fell in love with the subject, I guess, and had a great industrial year, came back, did the final year. And I started to specialise in welding, believe it or not. My project, we built a welding rig where we were testing different welding materials. This is really geeky.
I actually done welding myself at one point. Did you? Yeah.
All right. So
just making gates and railings though, not aircraft.
Yeah. Well, we were testing. I was helped to build a rig that tested welding rods and different speeds of welding, this sort of thing. And the guy that helped me, it's a chap called Alan Wells, who you might remember the time was an Olympic sprinter. I think he might have won the gold medal at that point. I think it was the year the Americans didn't participate or something.
Maybe before my time, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably was. So this would have been. So I was at university, 1980 to 84. So this would have been 84. Yeah. Alan Wells, he was a sprinter, and so we built this rig, and I did my project, and it was anyway. So I got a scholarship to do a welding technology MSc at Cranfield University. But then I thought about it. I thought, is that what I really see myself doing? Because it would have got me into the oil industry. That was the way that was going. And I couldn't really see myself as that. I felt I was a bit more of a people person than someone went around inspecting welds. So I left and I joined a company called Johnson Matthey, who are a big bullion dealer, probably at the time, if not now, one of the biggest bullion dealers in the world. So they invented the catalytic converter. I went up to the Midlands, joined their jewellery and medical division, and I was selling dental alloys to dentists and dental technicians on their graduate training scheme. So that's my first kind of sales job, which I loved. I did that so that was 84. I did that until 86. Now, in big moment for me, in 85, I think it would have been perhaps 86, I lost my hair. Literally 3 weeks start to finish it went. No. So I've got something called alopecia universalis. It's a condition. It's an autoimmune condition. They don't really know what causes it.
So nothing happened. You often hear about falling out of a tree or something like that.
My granddad died around that time, and but there's no clear indication whether it was a stress event. I did have a bit of it when I was younger, patches, but it grew back. Yeah. But this was a complete hair loss.
I had no idea it was so quick.
Yeah,
So I remember you don't get told it's that quick.
I lost all the hair on the top of my head. You couldn't see it. It just came out in clumps. I went into my boss. Is that okay if we swear on this?
Of course, yeah.
I went into my boss, a chap called Eddie Butcher, who was a real dyed-in-the-wool Cockney. He was the sales manager. And I said, Eddie, I've got a bit of a problem. He said, what's that? And I put my head down. He said, oh, fucking hell. He said, get yourself home. So I went home and...
You're probably thinking, what have you got?
Yeah, I had all sorts of tests. There was nothing wrong with me apart from this alopecia. And over the 3 weeks I was at home, all my hair went. In fact, I shaved. There was a bit left and I shaved off. Yeah. And I was in a sales job and I rang him up, Eddie, and I said, Eddie, I'm fine, lost all my hair. So, but I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back on whatever it was, a Monday. My home was in Essex and I was up in Birmingham. So I went back up And I said, just tell everybody I've lost my hair, but I'm fine. I'm okay. And so I did, and I went back into work. Because I was in a sales job, I was customer facing.
Yeah.
But what it did, I decided this can either really define me in a bad way or in a really good way. And it was a real crossroads, because I thought I could either go retreat into my shell and, you know, and never kind of step foot outside the door, or I could just go for it and make a thing
So
of it.
how old were you at this point?
So I was 22, 23.
Shit. Yeah.
So, and I was.
You sat there now. I'm like, but 22 or whatever
and
it is.
it was quite big. I mean, I had a relationship that ended as a result of it. I mean, there was all sorts of other things going on, but she couldn't really cope with what was going on, and my parents were distraught. You know, it was a lot of kind of not great stuff around me, but I just decided that I'm going to make it a positive rather than a negative. And I was quite vain. It's kind of like my hair was quite important. And
you don't realise it's important, do you, until you haven't got any.
Until you lose it,
It's like,
and I had no idea if it was going to grow back. I had a hint it probably wouldn't. That was what little, and the medical establishment didn't really understand. Certainly at that time, they're better now. Didn't understand what there weren't any cures. And I decided I wasn't going to go down the wig route or anything like that. I was just going to go as I am. And so I had to go through this period, like literally going out, reintroduce myself to my clients. Like, I was the guy a month ago that came to see you, and I now look like this. And it was good. It became a talking point, and people knew me and recognised me and that sort of stuff. And at the time, it was quite unusual. Maybe it's because I'm much more sensitised to it. I notice it's more common now. I don't know why that might be. So I did, and it was a real character building.
I can't stop looking at your head now. I thought you just shaved it.
Well, a lot of people do, and I'm lucky. I don't have ears that stick out, and my head's quite smooth. I don't, there are people in my position that don't have that.
Yeah.
And it fueled my fire. Really, it really got me. I thought I wasn't going to let it. I thought if I can get through this, I can get through anything. And so I was doing this job, which I love, but it precipitated a lot of, you have something like this, you reflect on what you want to do. And I'd always fancied the idea of doing a master's in something. I was considered becoming a lawyer. That was one thing, retraining as a lawyer. An accountant was the other thing. I thought, I can't really see myself as an accountant. So then I decided I'm going to do an MBA, Master's in Business Administration. So I went to Manchester Business School, did a Master's in Business Administration. Are you familiar with what an MBA is? So the model came from Harvard, basically. It was the Harvard MBA. And there were two schools set up, London and Manchester, that follow the Harvard model. And now there are hundreds of places you can do an MBA. But at the time, there was only about maybe 8 or 10. And Manchester and London were the only 2-year courses. And I wanted to do a proper 2-year course because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to completely take a different path and get some real heavyweight business training. And the course was amazing. It was world class. And I was fortunate to spend some time in New York at NYU, New York University. And I specialised in finance, did a term there, 3 months there. So at the end, I did the MBA, and I basically specialised in IT and finance. Those are my two strengths. And on the back of that, I joined a company called Hoskins that's now Capgemini, a big IT firm, and they trained me as a business analyst and a project manager. And that precipitated what happened with the rest of my career, because I did that. I was working with them for 2 years, and then I decided management consultancy was the thing I wanted to do. So I left there and I joined what was then Touche Ross, became Deloitte's now, and I was working in the Treasury department, advising companies on foreign exchange risk and setting up payment mechanisms and this sort of thing. And then I did other consultancy assignments within that firm. But it was great because I was part of a firm, but it was very much, I was targeted on my own utilisation. I had to go and sell myself within the firm, to partners who were bidding for jobs. So it really taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, and I had this sales training from previously, so I was good at
was everything, when you say it was targeted, but was it targeted by them? Did they know what you should be putting out?
Well, I was targeted on utilisation. I was at the grade I was at, I had to get myself sold out. So I think at the time I probably would have been quite junior. So initially I was targeted on about 80-90% utilisation. I had to make sure I was sold out on client site 80% of the time. So I had to go to the guy who did the resource allocation, find out what projects were on, go and speak to the partner, show the partner my CV and say, this is what I do, this is what I can do. So it was very much an internal sales process, which is great. It worked really well, and I loved it. I really loved it. And I got promoted pretty quickly to quite a senior level there. And as you went more senior, your target utilisation dropped, because the expectation is you would be involved in much more the proposal and selling side. So I did that, and I then decided that I probably needed some real world experience rather than just advising advising organisations on issues without having any real experience of living with them. I thought I'd better go and get some real world experience. So I joined Lehman Brothers at the time, and I took I was head of IT for a particular sector of the business.
Wow.
It was their treasury sector. Interesting firm, Lehman Brothers, as we know what happened. Very much.
What year was this?
This would have been, I think I joined them in about 87. So I did MBA, MBA 86 to 88. Then I did Hoskins until 1990, early 90s it would have been. So I joined Lehman Brothers. Really, really tough environment, politically kind of hard to navigate, and very sort of. It was just culturally it was great. It was great education for me, but you were dealing with some, incredibly demanding people who were heavily incentivized to do a particular thing, basically sell as much as possible. And I was part of the support process that enabled that to happen. There wasn't a lot of forgiveness around mistakes, or it was a real
one for the CV.
Exactly. So I did a couple of years there, and then I got an opportunity to join what was then Abbey National, became Santander. Actually, after I left Abbey National, I joined Abbey National. I took a senior IT role implementing a big dealing system for the front office, the traders. I ran a team there, and it was a project that had a bit of a history to it. It hadn't gone that well, and I was brought in to turn it around, and that became a bit of a theme. I did quite a lot of project turnaround stuff, which I'll come to in a bit. So I was there for I think a couple of years, implementing the system, setting up the support for it. It was quite a small. This was called Abbey National Treasury Services. So it was a little investment bank that was kind of separate to the main building society. In fact, about probably a couple of years after I left, there was quite a lot of controversy around how the organisation was run, and I think when Santander came along, they effectively collapsed a lot of that organisation and got rid of it. But it was fun at the time. Kind of knew it was kind of the guy who set it up, who was a guy called Gareth Jones, was a bit of a character, and he was very much it was his own fiefdom. And he ran it. He built this up from nothing and ran it to. It was quite a successful part of the organisation at the time. But then Santander came along.
Nothing untoward in it, though.
No, they were just trading in complex securities that, and there was these securities were very volatile on a daily basis. and the way they accounted for them, they didn't account for that volatility, and he basically hid a lot of that volatility.
Got it. Yeah.
And then when they actually looked at it on a day-to-day basis, they found they were in massive loss one day and massive profit the next. And it was
so I guess more high risk investments than
but the risk wasn't reflected in the way they accounted for it, and that was and you know, at the time regulation wasn't really keeping up with a lot of this stuff.
No.
I mean, regulation tends to happen very much in hindsight. So then I left there and I joined NatWest Markets, which was the investment banking arm of NatWest, working with the head of IT there. They had a program where they brought in a small cohort of people who worked with him, as effectively he mentored them, and then you went into the business and then did a line role. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I that was when, so that was coming up to 99 when there was the big conversion to the euro, when the euro became live. So I managed the euro conversion within NatWest Markets, which was a hugely complex project. I didn't manage it to completion because I then joined a mate of mine called Marcus Rule, was starting up a company called Rule Financial, and it was a consultancy. So I joined him when we were starting it up, and I ended up running the Euro project for JP Morgan, which was his first project that he won. So I did the Euro conversion with JP Morgan, which was actually, I'd say I ran a part of it. And then, so I did that, and then I went on to the year 2000 project for JP Morgan.
And that was presumably before the year 2000, was it? Or?
Yeah, no, so we managed, so we were running a big testing program to understand how these systems would behave.
The Millennium Bug.
And then, the Millennium Bug, exactly. And there was a massive refresh program in replacing systems and old kit and everything else. Huge. It was hundreds of millions.
Do you think it was all needed?
Well, it's an interesting question because, so JP Morgan took the view that it was an opportunity for them to do a big refresh that was long overdue.
Anyway,
And for them, the impact was minimal. Now, arguably, the reason why the impact was minimal was because there was so much work done in the run-up to it. So it was a big insurance policy.
I mean, I remember at the time the common joke was nothing happened. Everyone was waiting for this big, but was it because they hyped it up so much that people panicked so much?
Could planes have fallen out the sky? Could this have happened? Who knows? But lots of companies, I mean, JP Morgan they had a very positive view of it, that it was an opportunity.
I should perhaps explain for our younger listeners, but the Millennium Bug is a thing that happened in the year 2000 when we thought computers just aren't going to be able to cope with this change from 1999 to 2000.
Yeah, because of the two-digit year, 99 to 00. That was the thing that was going to trigger.
Apparently the world was going to end. So on the lead up to the year 2000, we were all in the IT industry anyway. We were all in a bit of a panic, and just thought the world would end, but it didn't, thankfully, and most computers did.
But I think
cope okay.
I think JP Morgan spent well over $200 million on that project.
But as you said, they needed to refresh anyway.
Yeah, they refreshed a lot of stuff, and so they saw it as an opportunity.
Interesting though, we have similar things going on to this day. We've had obviously the changeover from we're currently going through it, old copper cable to fibre to premises. We're certainly seeing it in our industry, and prior to that, it was the change from copper cables, phone calls coming down copper cables to hosted telephony online. So gradually, they've happened gradually though. Whereas that was almost like it's going to happen on this day. So we had this amount of time to
and there was quite a few Big Bang type projects. There was the Big Bang in the city, where the city they automated a lot of stuff, and then we had the Euro project, which had a really strict deadline. It was the midnight of December 31st in 1999 that currencies like the Deutschmark, the Drachma, the French franc disappeared, and euros appeared, and that was a massive.
They always have these hurdles. I guess regardless of period of time. But I'm just thinking ahead now. We've got Windows 10 cease of support next year, or this year, sorry, and.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always these deadlines. But sorry, so
No, that's
carry
all
on,
right.
yeah.
No, that's fine. So I was running big projects, and then I went on to run some other bigger projects for investment, large tier 1, tier 2 investment banks. Did some work for ABN AMRO. I did some work when Royal Bank of Scotland took over NatWest. Lots of my old colleagues at NatWest Markets.
Mm-hmm.
One of them became head of IT for Royal Bank of Scotland Financial Markets. So I went back to work for him as his business manager. So I was very much in big bank projects. Starting to get a bit tired of that. So I wanted to move much more towards smaller projects. So I moved more towards the hedge fund industry, which at the time was, I was dealing with organisations that were much smaller in scale, and I was working with the business owners to establish a business, and I was brought in to help kind of construct the infrastructure and the back end, get them to the point where they were able to be signed off. What at the time was called the FSA, is now the FCA, was the Financial Standards Authority, became the Financial Conduct Authority. But you effectively had to have a fully fledged operating environment for the FCA to sign you off, to then you can start trading. So there's a big investment up front.
But was it very different than what you'd done previously with the much larger firms?
It was different in the scale of it, and I was dealing with people, and it was their money, or they were managing the money. So I was dealing with the founders. I mean, the scale of what I was doing previously, I was working in a UK branch office of JP Morgan, and all the decisions were made in New York. In this environment, decisions were making behind the guy in the main office.
I always wonder though, is the decision any different if a business has more money to spend? Is it a proportionately bigger decision if it's more money?
Yeah, I think it's, these environments were not simple, but it was a much simpler, because we had a very clear, we were building an infrastructure to meet a particular objective, and there was a finite amount of money that was available to be spent until this organisation had to start earning money. So the decisions it was a simpler discussion, and the decision making process, everybody was in the room that could make that decision. But the thing I loved about that was, I'd be sitting in a room with the partners, and they were saying, well, we've got this idea, we want to launch this fund generally they'd always want to launch it in 9 months, and it would always take, and I would say to them, it would take 18 months. That's how long it takes. But we would literally, it was my job to create the infrastructure, describe what it was going to be like in terms of technical infrastructure, in terms of commercial relationships, in terms of the contracts we needed in place, the staff. So it was taking an idea and turning it into a fully formed business, what that business looks like, and then the process of taking the point from where we are now to getting to that point, which is a big parallel in coaching as well. So I did that a number of times with hedge funds, got them from literally a whiteboard concept through to a fully fledged business. And at that point, I'd hand over my role to who would have been the head of ops. I did actually join one of the funds I worked with. I did join them as head of ops for a while, which was not. And I realised running an operation's not my bag. What my bag is either creating something or turning something around, because at the time I was involved in quite a lot of project turnaround as well. So I would get involved with firms, with companies, big or small, that had projects that had run into the weeds, or they weren't getting anywhere, or it had gone wrong. It'd be my job to unpick why it had gone wrong, get it back on track, and get the thing implemented. So I got a lot of experience of building something from nothing and also fixing something that had been broken, both of which have become really useful skill sets. Then I also got a taste then for doing my own thing, and I decided to come up with So I left a company called Raw Financial. I left it and I joined this hedge fund for a while, ran their operation for a bit until I decided that cash reconciliations weren't really my thing and somebody else could do that. So I left them and went back on my own. And at the time, I was dabbling a little bit in property investment. And I kind of figured that property investors often wanted to invest in areas that they weren't familiar with. Unless they physically went there, it was quite hard for them to ascertain which was a good and a bad investment. So as part of my, at that time, I'd also joined another consultancy, and that consultancy had a link with a mapping company. So I took this idea to the mapping company of a company called Basemap to create a platform where we could take data such as census data, locations of where doctors, supermarkets, schools were located, and also other dimensions such as crime data, and overlay that onto a map. So an investor, a potential investor, could very quickly ascertain where they want to invest in Liverpool, for example, where areas they should avoid, where areas they should go to by doing some very kind of visual data analysis, looking at these elements on a map.
So just to sort of clarify that, if you like, so you were working for or with an existing mapping company?
No, I came up with the idea. Right. So I took the idea to Basemap. We created...
But Basemap was not your entity?
No, it wasn't at the time. I've since become involved with Basemap.
Got it.
Which I'll come to. But so Basemap was a software company, or is a software company that is all about mapping location-based data onto maps and using that as a basis for analysis. So they were taking things like speed data and linking it into OS maps, Ordnance Survey maps, and selling that to things like transport planners, for example. So I took this idea, we called it Street Profile, and they came up with a prototype, a working prototype of a platform where investors could log onto an area and drill down and understand the profile of a particular area in terms of crime, access to facilities, density of population, and a whole plethora of other things. So I took this idea around the property investment forums and got a lot of interest. But what we found was that people didn't really want to pay for it, and we were struggling. I had some investors interested in backing me to do it, but we couldn't work out how to monetize it. And it would take an awful lot of investment to get it to a point where it was a mature platform that would work. At the time, I started getting quite heavily involved with Basemap and realised that they were in a mess. They'd spent all their time and efforts building a platform and had let go of a lot of their core business, and their turnover dropped, and they were a tiny company. And they started making losses, basically. It was two founders and a developer and another guy. So I said, well, look, I have experience in doing turnaround. I said, if you give me a chunk of equity, I'll put a little bit of money into it and I'll help you turn it around. So that's what I did. And this was in 2013, I became the chief exec. They gave me a third of the company. I bought some shares from the founders and put my head under the bonnet of the company and realised it really was an absolute basket case. All sorts of things had been done. They hadn't got proper agreements in place. They'd given away intellectual property and all sorts of stuff. So I spent about a year trying to clear up this mess and keep them solvent. Our balance sheet was in such poor condition, the banks wouldn't lend to us, and we were going to run out of money. So I discovered that as directors we could pour all our pensions into a pension pot, and that pension pot could lend half its assets to the company. So I set that up through a third party, very expensive thing to set up, but we did it. It's the only way we could raise money. Managed to raise, I can't remember how much we raised. It was maybe 40 or 50,000. It was enough to buy us some time. I had to sort out, they'd done this ridiculous deal with a firm of accountants, the founders of which were actually band directors. They'd been involved in a business that had gone under, and they were
Locally,
a husband and wife team. So the company was based in Guildford. This was a Portsmouth-based firm of accountants. The founder, one of the founders, hadn't realised he'd inadvertently triggered a 5-year contract with them by not signing something.
Yeah.
So we ended up going through a protracted. I thought, we've got to unpick ourselves from this. It was ridiculous. They had no, at the time, we take things for granted, things like Xero and QuickBooks. There was no cloud, but I mean, they were starting to become a thing back then.
2009.
So they had no idea what their P&L was, or cash flow, or anything like that, because they used to post receipts off to this company and then get accounts back 2 or 3 weeks later. So I said, we've got to stop all that. Ended up going through quite a painful process, unpicking ourselves from these charlatans, essentially. Got a lawyer involved. In the end, we got a lawyer involved, and they backed off completely. We managed to unpick that and appointed a new accountant, implemented Xero, implemented a cash flow forecasting tool, and got in place a much more dynamic relationship with numbers. And again, this is how I work with my coaching practice, is getting the founders to have a much more dynamic and intimate relationship and understanding of their numbers. So it took me about 18 months, 2 years, managed to double the size of the company. We sorted out the sales side. I think we hired a salesperson from memory. We doubled the company, got them to break even. And at the time, I'd got a mate of mine from university who was an expert in software sales, got him involved. He came on board as chairman, was running overseas sales, and then he was living abroad, so I came back to the UK. I said, look, I'm kind of had enough now. I've kind of done what I need to do. I don't want to run this operation anymore. It's better you. So he then became chief exec. We gave him some equity, and I became chairman. And I'm still chairman.
This wasn't doing probably investment side.
No, sorry, I should have pointed out. So we decided to, because Basemap were in such a mess,
focus on that.
They had no capacity to do this, and that was going to take a lot of focus and investment. So we decided to mothball that and then focus on turning around the Basemap core business.
Yeah. Just explain to me that core business. What does
so
that
the core
look like?
business is, so we have a.
You said selling data to like.
So so the reason why they nearly went under is because they developed their own what's called an accessibility platform. It's a piece of software that measures mass movement of people.
Oh, wow.
So it would. So for example, a good case study. It's not a real one, but let's say Norfolk has 20 libraries. Using the software, we could work out that 80% of people can get to a library within an hour, whether that's driving, walking, cycling, or public transport. So with arm of that information, we've got 20 libraries. We've only got budget for 17 libraries. We need to get rid of 3 of them. Which 3 do we get rid of has a minimum amount of impact? People get into a library. And what can we do? Things like bus routes and road junctions and that sort of thing to make sure that people can continue to get to a library within an hour. That's typically the sort of...
Yeah.
So we sold to people like transport planners and local authorities were the 2 main outlets for that. In conjunction with that, we also sold data sets, big data sets. And I'm talking about average speed data. So companies like TomTom, for example, have had sat-navs that sat in cars for years, and these gathered anonymously data around speeds along certain roads. So we had very massive data sets that on a given stretch of road at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, the average speed was 34 miles an hour.
I wonder if it ever flagged up the speed as like really seriously.
No, well, it was because it was mass. It wasn't individual. Obviously, it gathered it from individual devices, but that data has a real value. When you're measuring accessibility, it has real value.
Oh yeah.
And there are a number of suppliers of these data sets. So Basemap is an expert in taking those data sets and linking them to map bases generally supplied by Ordnance Survey. So we became a data reseller as well as selling our own platform. And we've got Track, which is our accessibility platform. We've got a number of other pieces of software that do different very specialist parts of accessibility. And we've got another piece of software that takes these big data sets and enables you to, say, for example, you only want to focus on Cambridge. Oh, census data was another big one. We would process census data, and you could draw a line around Cambridge. It would create the data set just for Cambridge, and you'd pay just for rather than paying for a national data set. Yeah. So that's what Basemap does, basically. So we supply local authorities, transport planners. We do a lot of work with Ordnance Survey. If you go onto Google and you do an A to B journey time and bus data, you get bus time. We effectively supply that bus timetable data.
Yeah. I did always wonder how it works out. You know, obviously your time of arrival and stuff like that on Google Maps, and you always try and beat it, don't you? You always think, well, is that an average based on my normal driving, or is that based on the? Yeah,
you mean the. So Google will do it based on average speed data.
Do you think it's probably different to the way that would work, but do you think they have the ability to sort of be more specific? For example, last week on this day and time, it took this long to get from A to B. So we're using that data from last Friday.
No, it's not. So the data is very much. It's not. It wouldn't be that specific.
No,
it would be the data. I don't know how often that data is refreshed. I doubt it's because it's a massive data set.
Yeah.
And over time, those average speeds don't really vary that much.
No, I can't imagine.
But
they do.
if you set off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon versus 8 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get different times.
Oh yeah.
And that's based on the average speed.
Or
data.
if I guess they do change the road layout somewhere around that point, it wouldn't take long for them to suss that out and amend the data, I guess. But
yeah, and the clever stuff now is joining different modes of data. So I'm cycling to the station, I'm getting a train, and I'm cycling the other end, or I'm driving somewhere and combining multimodal, they call it, is what it's described as. But it's a really interesting area.
It is, yeah. It's I can imagine quite complex, but
and I'm pleased to say Basemap is thriving now.
Yeah,
I mean,
good.
it is. Mark's done a
and you're still as
job.
chairman, are you?
Yeah, I'm still chairman. So I got us to about 450, 500,000 markers effectively over the last 5 or 6 years. We've trebled the size of the company, and we've now got all our development is in house, and we are really in our space. We're famous for what we do. We're really well known for what we do. But in terms of an exercise in learning how to turn a company around, I mean, that was...
Absolutely.
I mean, literally, we're staring in the headlights. Literally every month, can we pay the staff?
Yeah.
Can we survive?
And at that point, sort of what level of size of business was it?
About, when I came in, it was about 200,000 turnover. They were losing 60,000 the year when I came on board. They'd lost 60,000. And it was two founders and
any one thing really spells out the reason it turned around, or was it just the process and
it was so it was mainly focus. So they'd taken their eye off the ball. A lot of their income had come from consultancy, and they poured all their resources in building this accessibility platform. And
so your fault, basically. You were giving them this project, and they were
no. Sorry, no, not the street pro. Yeah, I mean, well, street profile was a distraction. No, they were building the accessibility platform themselves.
Yeah.
And the reason why they run into trouble is because they'd literally forgotten their consultancy business.
No, I thought you meant they were focusing on your project that you brought to them.
No. What became pretty clear was they didn't have the capacity.
Yeah, of course.
So we mothballed that.
Yeah.
and we went straight away to fixing Basemap. So what we had to do is we had to get some consultancy work in as quickly as we could. We had to get this software to the point where we could sell licenses. It wasn't in a saleable state, and classic, they thought it was going to take them 3 months, and 18 months on, it still wasn't saleable. They'd done a very they'd given away half the IP to an external software house to build it, and it was a crazy thing to do.
And I think I've asked you this before, but did you ever get in front of the likes of Rightmove or Zoopla or anything like that to provide?
So we did for the street profile, the bit we multiple, we did speak to Purple Bricks in the early days, who were, Purple Bricks was two brothers, and one of them was interested in what we were doing and the other one really wasn't. I mean, in terms of estate, and I think certainly, I can't remember which platform it was, Rightmove or Zoopla, did introduce.
They have certainly got
like
a lot
commuting
of those,
time type, and I think there's a lot of data you can pick up about. You can profile when you look at a house now on those platforms, you get a complete profile.
They've all got that sort of information on them now, haven't they? Where they get that from, I don't know.
So a lot of that stuff's commoditized. It was quite hard to monetize it, to charge a premium for it, basically. Imagine. So that's why we did it. But yeah, so Basemap. So it's about getting control of what's going on, data, creating focus around where the income's going to come from in the short term, and having a clear target to get to, in that case, break even as quickly as possible before we ran out of money, bringing external money in, which we did through the pension thing, to plug the gap until we got to break even, but making sure we were generating enough cash flow we could afford to repay that loan and future loans. It was kind of a combination of that, really. Great training for coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did the coaching come in? Are we skipping anything by jumping onto that?
So I did, so Basemap I kind of let go. I mean, I'm chairman still, but I sort of stepped away about 2015, 2016, and then I was casting around for my own thing. And that's when I became vegan in 2014. Again, a real big moment of change for me, and it precipitated a whole change in my politics, changing my outlook. And I'd always had a bit of an issue with city and finance and that industry. One of the things that got me, it wasn't the obvious stuff, like the ethics of it. I mean, that got me, but it was more that they produced nothing. There's nothing physical produced. So they didn't.
It's true, isn't it? You don't really think.
They don't. They just made wealthy people wealthier.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a role for it. Of course, there was a role for it, but they didn't physically produce. And I wanted to get into physically producing something. So I became vegan in 2014 and went on a bit of a journey of what do I want to do. And it took me a couple of years to figure it out. And then I met a chap called Nick, who became a friend. And he had a food product he made in his kitchen called seitan, which is a wheat-based vegan meat product. It's been around in some version for 1,500 years, came from the Far East. Very similar history to tofu, but different product. And we looked around and there was nobody producing it, so we decided to create a business producing seitan. Initially, we were going to have a food truck selling finished products. It was actually, we developed this idea of having he figured out that people love curry, but you couldn't eat a curry one-handed. So he came up with this thing, which was a wrap with a curry filling. His wife created incredible curry sauces. And the seitan, he was vegan as well. The seitan was the filling. And so that's...
I wonder if that'd have legs, just any curry. Just that container,
I think it probably would. I think a version of it has been done now. So anyway, we were testing out the recipes in his kitchen. Remember, it was July 2017, and we had this light bulb moment. We said, rather than create the product, like the finished product, why don't we market and sell the seitan itself, and let somebody else turn it into stuff? And that's what we did. So we came up with a name which was Love Seitan. Got it trademarked, I had a big fight with the trademark office about whether we could use that word because they said it was an English word and we said it wasn't. Anyway, I won that. We got a two-team market. We launched that two-team vegan market. We launched our business and then we did a bigger event a couple of months later and it really took off. We were selling the stuff by the block. Initially we were weighing it out like a proper deli with scales, and we thought, not going to do that, and we pre-wrapped it. And we had a web shop, we were selling it over the web. Nick was a web developer by background, so we had an e-commerce business. Then we started to sell into trade, selling it to restaurants, and we got listings.
So what was the, I don't know, USP of it? Is it
well,
cheaper, easier to produce than tofu, or is it?
It was very meat-like, much more meat-like than tofu, more meaty texture. It still had the traditional credentials. And at the time, the vegan meat products weren't really that well. They weren't great. They weren't that well developed. Now you've got some fantastic vegan meat replacements, and and it was kind of, it worked really well. It was easy to cook with. You could eat it straight from the pack, or you could stir fry it and cook it. We got noticed by a couple of really big food manufacturers who produced ready meals for the supermarkets, and one came knocking on our door and said we had a pepperoni product and said we were developing a vegan pepperoni pizza for, it would have been Waitrose at the time. Can we use your pepperoni? They said the problem is we had soy sauce in it. It needed to be soy free, so we had 6 weeks to create a soy free version, which we did. And we ended up all our arrangements soy-free after that, because at the time soy was starting to get a bit of a bad rap in terms of allergens. A lot of these factories were soy-free anyway. They didn't want to introduce soy as an allergen. So we developed a soy-free version and we launched it was Waitrose's own brand, but our product was the pepperoni on a Waitrose pizza.
Oh, wow.
And then we were used on a Sainsbury's vegan pizza. And then we were in a Sainsbury's had a couple of other products. We had it was a kind of a pasty sort of product, and our product was used in the pasty for that. And then we were in Tesco's in a pie. So we had a number of products through third-party manufacturers. We were supplying
ingredients to, yeah.
We were supplying an ingredient, yeah, exactly. So the company was growing, and then we hit lockdown, and a lot of our restaurant business stopped. As you can imagine, our e-commerce business took off because everybody was buying stuff over the web. So we managed to survive through lockdown, and we were doing okay. We started to grow. So we borrowed money to grow the company. And then things started to change. We had, coming out of lockdown, buying patterns changed. People stopped buying online. Cheaper vegan meat alternatives were coming onto the market. So we lost quite a bit of the production, the big production stuff. We weren't doing it at a high enough scale to get the costs down to the point where we were competitive. And it would have taken a lot of money to get us to the point where we were competitive. Our investor at the time just didn't want to invest any more money into the company. So we tried to pivot the company more into a retail offering. We came up with some concepts for supermarkets, and I tried to raise some funding off the back of that. But in a way, I'd left it too late, and money completely dried up. It was about, when was the Ukraine war? When did that start? That was in 22.
February 22.
Yeah, so that was coming late 21. We had a couple of big customers go bust on us as well. We had another big wholesaler that cancelled an order, cost us thousands. So we had a number of things happen, and the business was just going downhill, and we had big debts to repay. So really didn't have any choice. So it came to about August 23, and then we had to shut the business. I just couldn't raise money. I couldn't get us out of that. And so we thought, I was advised an orderly shutdown was the best way of doing it, which is what I did. This is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, it's he must still be thinking, as I am, surely there's the right time and place. That's got legs.
Yeah, and seitan has never really been hit the mainstream like tofu. Tofu is now. It was big at the time. Has become that was always our model to emulate what tofu did. I think tofu has just been one. There's another one called tempeh. You may have heard of tempeh. Tempeh is something that's which is fermented soy product. And that's starting to. So there's in the vegan meat market, it's broadly split. You've got the vegan meat products, which are the copies of burgers and sausages and steaks. Then you've got the traditional vegan meat products and or vegan protein products, better way to put it. And tofu's the biggest. Seitan was up there. We were doing okay, and there was a couple of other players out there, but it's never really.
So generally, the vegan and vegetarian market, is that still increasing market share, or is it stabilised now, or is it still?
Certain sectors are increasing. There was a bit of the ultra processed food controversy has hit the vegan kind of copy alternative market hard, because these are heavily processed foods, but in the same way there are heavily processed meat products, so that hit it quite hard. The supermarkets are bringing in much cheaper alternatives. A lot of the independent businesses like us were never going to be able to compete, because we can't compete with Sainsbury's and Waitrose on price. Overall, I don't know. I'm out of touch with how the trends are going. I mean, I think what's happened is lots more people are reducing meat from their diet, and are what became they're kind of flexitarians is the term, where instead of eating meat 6 or 7 times a week, they might eat it 2 or 3 times a week, or they'll give it up once a week. So and that's growing. People are becoming much more aware of the health implications of eating animal products. Ethics is a thing. Environment is a big thing. That's the big.
Oh, of course.
So the 3 big drivers are health, ethics, and environment. And environment is always like the third. Certainly since COVID, it's become the biggest driver.
Yeah.
So I think the number of people who are open to the idea of eating less meat or not eating meat is certainly increasing. Vegan meat alternatives and cheese alternatives are not health foods. And if you're coming at it from a health perspective, you're not going to choose those products. You're going to choose lentils and chickpeas and that sort of thing. So I think generally it's on the increase. Whether those particular sectors are increasing, I'm not sure. I understand tempeh, which is a relatively new kid on the block. Friends of mine own a tempeh company. That market seems to be growing, but it's a tiny market anyway, so it doesn't take much for it to grow.
Right. Well, what are you doing now then? Let's get to that side.
It was always my objective to get into coaching, and I've had, as you can hear, I've had a pretty varied background.
That's a very, I think, experienced background as well.
Yeah, and so I've got a lot of experience of doing turnaround. I've a lot of experience of wading into situations.
And I'm glad to hear it hasn't all been successful.
Yeah,
we learn from
really
our mistakes,
important.
don't we? And
So you used the term earlier about experience in the trenches.
Absolutely,
I've been there.
No, exactly. And I was kind of hoping there was something there.
And chaotic situations, I was really used to being parachuted into chaotic, confused situations and put in structure and process. So turnaround, startups, creating something out of nothing, creating something from an idea and turning it into a fully formed business. And a lot where I start with clients is, what's your vision? And what does that mean? Do you want to retire? Do you want to exit? Do you want to sell? Or do you want to just more time on the golf course? So what does your business need to look like in order to support that vision? In other words, how big is it? Turnover, team, so let's describe what the business needs to look like. And that might be 5 years out. So what's the journey to getting from where you are now to there? And let's break it down. Let's look at it 3 years. Let's look at it in a year. Let's look at it in a quarter. And all of the time keeping a view on what the bigger what the big picture is, what the vision is. And it's the link between the business being an enabler for that vision. You know, as business owners, you know, the vast majority of our wealth is tied up in our business and that business throwing off an income or being worth something to somebody. And a large part of that journey is removing the owner from working in the business to working on the business. And that's a well-worn maxim, but it's really important that a business has value when it runs, irrespective of whether the owner's sitting there from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So in other words, teams and processes and systems, and switching from one-off income to recurring income, you know, where you only have to sell it once and you get income forever, as opposed to constantly selling. So it's that kind of dynamic, which then leads to this vision of where I want to be. And it's really important, I think, for business owners in that vision to not necessarily know all the answers. It shouldn't be a vision that's rooted in, well, I think that's what I can do, knowing because I'm turning over 200,000 now, if I grow at 20% a year, that's going to be whatever it is. That's a contributory factor to it. But I think it's better also to come out the other way. What do I want that business to be? I might only know 50% of the answer right now, but that gives us massive capacity to work some magic that we don't know yet. And you know, a lot of the questions I ask owners are, what's the magic you bring to the business? Guess what? It's not doing the invoicing. You know, it's not fixing something. It's actually the creativity you bring and the product development and the customer relationships. That's the magic you bring. So wouldn't it be great if you could do more of that rather than, you know, and a number of business owners I found trying to do their own invoicing because they want to save money on an accountant or doing their own legal contracts, God forbid, save money on a lawyer or not bothering with insurance or do whatever. You know, figure out what magic you bring and therefore what you should outsource. And don't see it as a cost, see it as an investment in you achieving your vision. And that's, to me, is the essence of coaching.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously, it's fair to say you haven't been doing this for decades,
No.
but you know, it's how have you set that company up, and what are you called, and for our
so I set it up a year ago. I met a chap about 18 months ago. Met a chap called Shane Spears, who developed a coaching process which he markets under the Summit Scale. Is the business. I looked around a number of. I came from a consultancy background that I found methodologies really valuable because methodologies are a great way of capturing experience and replaying it in a way that's reusable. So I looked at various coaching, Action Coach, Business Doctors, Entrepreneur Circle. Didn't like any of them for various reasons. You know, sometimes because they were very much focused on sales and Entrepreneur Circle, for example, very much focused on sales and marketing. Of course, that's really important, but there's a whole world of other stuff that needs to be sorted out. Shane's model was much more, let's take it back to basics. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the relationship with the numbers. Let's put in process and use that as a foundation. So he was working on his own. I said to him, had you ever thought about taking on associates to license your system? And he said, I haven't, but I have now. Give me a couple of months. And he went away and he contacted me Christmas 23 and said, right, I've now developed my coaching associate model. I want you to be the first one. You're the guinea pig. So I started with him in January 24. And that's what I use. So I use his system. It's not a rigid, there is structure to it. We have.
Is he allowing you to give feedback and mould and shape?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very dynamic. So I brought a friend of mine in. She's joined as well. She's a business coach based down in Essex. He's brought somebody else in. I think he's brought 2 others. So there's about 4 or 5 of us now. And so we have a 5-step process where we work out where a business is on those 5 steps. And each of those steps has a number of components. We call them silver bullets, and they are essential components of a successful business. And the idea is you work through and you implement that silver bullet before you move on.
Yeah.
But that it's not rigid, because for some people, so for example, some of the team development stuff comes a bit further down the line.
Yeah, or
But
they
some
could have
people,
a problem with one business. You've
Yeah.
got to sort that out before you even start on silver bullet
Yeah.
number one. Yeah.
but some people have a team issue, so we need to bring the team stuff forward. But it's always the same. It's let's get hold of the basics. Let's figure out what the business is. But at the same time, let's build the vision of where you want to be and where you want to go. Let's work out what magic you bring. And then we'll use that as a template for figuring out the priorities.
Exciting. And I know you're helping us at MT
Yeah,
soon,
exactly.
so,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so any real sort of, there can't be much in the short time you've been up and running, but any real success stories or any companies yet you've already seen growth in, or?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was thinking about that actually before I came on. I mean, for me, Basemap was very much a template of what I do now, and I'm really proud of the fact I got involved with a company that was literally on its knees. It was months away from going on.
And which company was it you went in front of the Dragons for?
Right, so that was Love Satan. So Love Satan, I was invited by the BBC to go on Dragon's Den. At the time, they were looking to bring vegan companies in. And so I went through the process, very lengthy and detailed process, the qualification process. And I went through the auditions and I got through. And it was the end of it's the end of 2020, because I just moved up to Norfolk. I moved up to Norfolk in September 2020. And in the November 2020, I was filmed to go on Dragon's Den. Now, brilliant, amazing experience. It was an incredibly difficult process internally. I had a reluctant investor I needed to bring on board, that we were going to do this because we had to dilute if we'd have gone with it. And you have to get all that agreed up front before you go on air, because I can't say I'll go away and talk to them. I can't phone them. So I went on and I did my pitch, got to the end of my pitch, and Suka Tulliman said to me, "And how much are you asking for?" I forgot to say what we were asking for. So I said that, and then I was grilled. I had prepared samples, and at the time it was all COVID, so I had to come up one at a time. I had to wear a mask, and it was kind of quite tricky logistically. And they all loved it. They loved the product. And then I was just grilled about the business. I thought Deborah Meaden was going to be the dragon that would go for it, because she was plant-based. She was the first one out. She decided that essentially her argument was, well, if you're telling me it goes, I don't actually care what goes on a pizza. You're telling me about the Satan, I don't care, as long as it vaguely represents meat. So she saw no value in it. Yeah. Peter Jones asked me some odd questions about, Peter Jones has made many investments in the food industry, but he asked questions that didn't, in my view, display a detailed knowledge of the food industry, because he didn't understand why we'd suffered. We'd done well through COVID, but we'd been hit quite hard. All his retail food did really, really well in COVID. Non-retail food did really badly because restaurants were closed. And at the time, we were growing our manufacturing side, and the message I got was focus on that. You don't really need our help to do that. Yeah. The best advice I got was the one dragon I didn't think I'd warm to. Was Tuka Suleiman, was brilliant. He said to me, because we were outsourcing our manufacturers, be very careful that your strategy doesn't become a sub-strategy of your outsourced manufacturer, that you still have control. And he was right.
I think he's the least personable of all the dragons, isn't he? But actually,
he was brilliant.
Often comes out with a nugget.
He was brilliant. He was warm. He was supportive. Really, really lovely guy. Not what I was expecting at all. So it was good. It was a great experience, but I didn't make it to TV because, in fact, I came off stage and the backstage manager, he said, I was watching on screen, and said, "How you didn't get an offer, I do not know." So my pitch went really well. Yeah. But I didn't.
Well, you win some, you lose some. It could have,
Yeah.
could have
But
been.
you know,
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
that's the other. It taught me a lot about how you present a company that's raising finance as well. Despite that wasn't successful, you know, it got me to focus on the elements of the business I thought would be valuable to investors.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So I always ask every guest we have on here, who would be your dream company to work for in your case, or to go into and have a look at? But more than that, who do you just want a coffee with? If there's one person you think or company you've come across and you'd love to get a coffee in with that guy.
Well, do you know?
See if we can find someone in our audience.
I'm actually building contacts with them. A really interesting company locally that we all know, but I've really understood the depth of their spread is Gerald's. Gerald's do an incredible amount in the startup community. You know, they have a Gerald's Growth Fund. They have a Gerald's Training that offers training to SMEs up to quite large companies. I have actually started to build relationships with the various bits within Gerald's. And they're a company I'd really like to work with.
I was surprised you said that, because I know they do lots of training, but I guess it's, you know, and something I wouldn't understand maybe the difference between them.
Yeah, they do a huge amount for the local business community.
Well, I've got thankfully lots of contacts in there, so I can. Certainly Elliot. I don't know if you've met him.
Yeah, I have. I have met Elliot. So, yeah, in fact, I mean, and my conversation with Elliot was really promising, because he said, I mean, I'm very strong on the finance elements of it. I'm not a trained accountant, but it's my background from the MBA and all the businesses I've run and got involved with. That is an area that they need help with in terms of their training offerings, and you know, he's been quite candid about that.
Well, I'm trying to get Elliot. Well, Elliot's already promised to come in and be in that chair, so no doubt I'll drill him. But let's get a coffee together with you two soon.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to call it there anyway.
Yeah.
We've yapped on for enough, and I know we've both got 3 o'clock, and it's 3 o'clock. So that's fine. But thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
The Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.